The work of Sigmund Freud offers a challenge to religious belief by arguing that instead of it being based on an objectively existing external being or object, instead it is the product of our minds. Religious belief under this understanding is as a result of a complex number of causes that result in our minds malfunctioning or becoming sick. In this instance, religious is a sickness that requires a cure. The human mind is made up of three aspects according to Freud. Firstly, there is the id, the unconscious self, the part of the mind that contains all kinds of basic drives and repressed memories. The id is amoral. It has no concern whatsoever with what is morally right or wrong. It is concerned with the self only and the gratification of self. It is a mental part of each one of us that we would probably be ashamed of if it could be made public. Another part of our mind is the superego. This is the part of us that is also what Freud called unconscious, but it is a part that instead of being natural is structured for us by our society. It is the part of our mind built by our parents, our teachers and our experiences. It is essentially our conscience or moral self. It tells us when to behave in a particular way and when not to. There are times when our id and our superego conflict. I might want to take the last biscuit from a plate, but I know it is considered bad manners to do so when others haven't had one. The ego is the part of our mind that we show to other people. It is conscious and is the mask we put on around other people. The person we want people to think we really are. When we become aware of unpleasant desires that we know will conflict with our society, we repress them, we feel guilt about them, and so we bury them, hide them so that others will not know. Sexuality is basic to personality. For Freud, sexuality meant love and sensuality in the widest sense. The id contains this sexual drive or libido. These sexual forces are often repressed, which leads to neurosis and anxiety. This is called sublimation, the projection of unconscious forces into culture. What it means is that certain libidinous aspects of our id are socially unacceptable. We cannot function in society if they are out in the open, and so we are forced to repress them. The Oedipus Complex was a good example of the kind of unconscious desires contained in our id. Oedipus was a character from ancient Greek myth. In this myth, Oedipus was sent away by his parents because there had been a prophecy that he would kill his own father and sleep with his mother. They had thought to leave him to die, but he was found and raised by a royal couple. When he heard about the prophecy, he wrongly thought it concerned the couple he believed were his parents, and so he ran away. On his journey, he met his real father and got into an argument with him. Without understanding who he was, he killed him. He went into the city of his birth and won the hand of the dead king's wife, his own mother. He married her and slept with her. The story illustrated what Freud thought all men go through as part of their development into adulthood. Early on in their infancy, when they are being breastfed, boys get a sexual experience and bond with their mothers. Later, when they are weaned, they see their father as a potential sexual threat, and they desire that close sexual bond with their mothers as they once had. A boy will keep this secret, as they do love their fathers, but they hate them too, as they see them as competition for their mother's affections. They feel guilt, as Oedipus did, since such a desire is forbidden by the superego, and this is the start of the mental illness that leads to religion. Little Hans was a 5-year-old boy who had a phobia of horses. Hans had, at the age of 3, had an obsession with his own penis, often asking questions about it, playing with it and asking his mother if she had one. His mother had told him that if he didn't leave it alone, the doctor would come and cut it off. Later, at age 5, Hans had developed a fear that a horse would come and bite him in the street. He had seen a horse pulling a carriage in the past that had collapsed and died, and the noise of it hitting the ground with its hooves clattering against the cobbles had scared him. He especially didn't like horses with black bits around their mouths and with blinkers on. Over the course of weeks of treatment, Freud concluded that Hans was afraid that his father would castrate him for desiring his mother. The fear of horses represented the father with his moustache and glasses. The fear of the horse biting him symbolized the fear of castration as punishment for his incestuous desires. Horses were a particularly suitable symbol for the father because of their large penises. Freud claimed that between the ages of 3 and 6 years old, boys entered a phallic stage of development, where they develop intense sexual love for their mothers. They see their fathers as a rival and want to get rid of them. They see how strong their fathers are in comparison and begin to fear castration at the hands of their father when they realize the threat. Freud used Darwinism to support his theory of the Oedipus complex. In his book Totem Taboo, he claimed the primitive humans had lived in groups or hordes dominated by a powerful male who had sexual relations with all the women in the group and saw off any men who attempted to take what was his. In Freud's theory, early in the history of humanity, the men of the horde, driven by desire, hatred and jealousy, got together and killed the father figure so that they could have access to the women. This is reenacted in a sacrifice and totemic feast. Overwhelmed with guilt for what they had done, they put a totem or symbol, in those days an animal, in the place of the father and made two rules. One, that no one may kill the totem, and the other, that no one may commit incest, their original desire. For Freud, this act was the beginning of religion. It explains the fact that in all humans, or at least in all men, there is an Oedipus complex that must be controlled, and that there is a symbolic figure which induces guilt and fear, but is also sacred and to be protected, i.e. God, who, by no coincidence, is thought to be the father in the main theistic faiths. All this sublimation has the knock-on effect that feelings must be expressed somehow, a bit like a build-up of pressure will cause an explosion. So we express them through other more socially acceptable ways, like through religious ritual and mystical experiences. Freud provided a complex argument to show that the natural reaction of the psyche was to control feelings of guilt by transferring it away from itself and onto the surrounding objects or people. Freud equates the development of the species, phylogeny, with the development of the individual. Thus mankind develops through the stages of animism, or magic, in which the world is inhabited by projected entities such as spirits. Religion, in which the universe is governed by projected God or gods. And then science, in which reality is faced up to and projection is withdrawn. These three stages correspond to the stages of the individual development, ontogeny, through narcissism, characterized by autoeroticism, in which the child is in love with itself, object finding, characterized by attachment to parents, and then maturity, characterized by adjustment to reality and turning to the external world for the object of desire. Freud believed that those suffering from extreme guilt do so because of early mental events where the conflict between the id and the superego is heightened, leading to sublimation. The mind's defense mechanism is to create idols or totems. This involved investing stones, trees, or animals with spirits. Having done this, the mind can redirect feelings of guilt onto the idol and can make amends through prayer and sacrifice, for example. The mind is therefore able to control the feelings of guilt essentially through self-punishment. The claim that religion is a form of childishness or immaturity resulting from unresolved Oedipus complexes. In effect, the idol or totem is a transformation of the father, and just as the father was regarded with ambivalence, so too is the totem. Sergei Pankejeff was a patient of Freud's who had a dream of a tree full of white wolves. He was given the pseudonym Wolfman to protect his anonymity. He had a phobia of animals. After much hypnosis, Freud traced the trauma back to a time when the young Pankejeff witnessed sexual acts between his parents. Freud reasoned that, over time, he had associated that scene with times when he'd witnessed animals having sex. The repressed trauma resulted in the fear of wolves and of God. He will redirect his feelings about his father towards something else, often religion. The father in the household, towards whom he has these mixed feelings of guilt and love, is replaced by God, who is the ultimate father figure. He has a mixture of guilt towards God, knowing that he has these unpleasant desires, but also feelings of loyalty, and works hard to be obedient through the performance of rituals and rites. Religion has a lot in common with other mental illnesses or neuroses, since there is this ritualistic performance of certain rites in both. It is possible, for instance, to compare the need for cleanliness found in some instances of obsessive-compulsive disorder with the need for ritual cleanliness found in religion. Baptism is a form of ritualistic cleansing. Communion has ritual cleansing for the priest before he handles the host or bread and wine. It contains confession before communion for the sins for which a person feels guilt. It also contains the reference to the killing of the one who is the object of worship. For Freud, religion is a universal obsessional neurosis or mental illness. This neurotic behavior can take on great significance in a neurotic's life, akin to the significance of religion. Religious obsession with ritual purity and avoidance of pollution is for Freud essentially neurotic. Freud pointed out similarities between neurotic ceremonials found in obsessive-compulsive disorders and the sacred arts of religious rituals. Conscious pangs after neglect, isolation from other actions, consciousness to detail. At its roots, religious rituals are like neurotic obsessive actions. Freud felt that religion is an illusion. This means it is a belief derived from human wishes, but Freud thought that this inhibits our freedom. He felt it stops us from thinking critically, and by linking religion with ethics, we've made a fundamental error. Religion, in essence, is dangerous and neurotic. Religious or mystical experiences, a feeling of an indissoluble bond of being one with the external world as a whole, a feeling of oneness with the universe, is called the Oceanic Feeling. It is for Freud a regression to an earlier state of childhood in which the boundary between the ego and the external world has not been delineated. The Oceanic Feeling is a residue from that time. Thus, religions of the East which emphasize the dissolving of the individual into a greater or total self are a regression to a childlike condition and an expression of wish fulfillment. The origins of religion can be traced back to these feelings of infantile helplessness. To summarize the process, we can construct a diagram. Firstly, we must remember the tripartite mind, which consists of the id and the superego that are both unconscious, and also the ego, which is the more conscious part of our mind. As a result of the conflict between the id and the superego, we find that unwanted sexual urges are repressed, and through the process of sublimation, the Oedipus complex occurs. Evidence for the Oedipus complex can be found in Freud's case studies, such as the cases of Little Hans and the Wolfman. The origins of this Oedipus complex are from the early ancestral group, called the Primal Horde, who killed their alpha male father in order to have access to the females in the group, but then experienced guilt as a result. The evidence for this being within the evolutionary process and from totemism in primitive human groups. The result of such a complex can be seen in the behaviour of a person who develops neurotic behaviour, such as obsessions, compulsions, and religion. The evidence for this is the comparison between the obsessive actions of other mentally ill people and the ritualistic behaviour of the religious. The conclusion that Freud drew is that religion, like any other neurosis, is something to be treated and cured.